Hey there, I'm Karen. If you'd have told me 5 years ago that I'd fall in love, get married, and plan a life around a man, I'd have called you delusional. You see, I had always been independent, focused on my career as a landscape architect and content with my life. But that was before John happened. I first met John at Emily and David's wedding. Emily is my college friend, and David is John's cousin. Their wedding was a fancy affair at a vintage ballroom, filled with string lights and people in elaborate dresses and suits. The moment I saw John, there was this strange familiarity, as if I'd known him in another life. "You look like you could use a drink," John said, breaking my train of thought as he handed me a glass of champagne. "And what makes you say that?" I asked with a raised eyebrow, taking the glass from his hand. "The way you're studying that wedding cake. It's like you're either starving or planning a heist," he chuckled. I laughed. "Oh, I'm definitely planning a heist. Can't let good frosting go to waste, can I?" Our conversation flowed effortlessly from there. We discussed everything from our jobs to our dreams, from politics to our shared love for gardening. By the end of the evening, it felt like we'd covered a lifetime. 2 years passed in the blink of an eye. Our relationship grew stronger, surviving all the usual trials and tribulations that couples face. And before we knew it, we were exchanging vows in a quaint little chapel. I was dressed in a simple yet elegant gown, and John looked dashing in his tuxedo. "Do you, John, take Karen to be your lawfully wedded wife," the minister intoned. "I do," John replied, eyes locked onto mine. "And do you, Karen, take John to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," I answered, my voice tinged with joyful emotion. "Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." As our lips met in a tender kiss, I felt the culmination of every shared glance, every laugh, and every moment we'd spent together. After the ceremony, John leaned in and whispered, "Are you ready for the adventure of a lifetime?" "Always," I whispered back, my heart soaring. We moved into my modest house, complete with a sprawling garden in the back, my pride and joy. I remember how John's eyes lit up the first time he saw it. We planted roses and hydrangeas, fantasizing about our future kids running around this very space amidst the beauty we'd created. We'd lie on the grass, staring at the sky, painting our shared dreams across the canvas of clouds. "So what's the dream, Karen? 5 years from now, where do you see us?" he asked one lazy Sunday afternoon. "In this garden, I guess. Only it'll be filled with the laughter of our kids, and the trees will be a little taller, casting bigger shadows," I replied. "And we'll be together," he said, pulling me closer. "Forever," I agreed. That garden wasn't just a piece of land. It was a patchwork quilt of our shared dreams, stitched together with love and care. Our home was filled with warmth and affection. We cooked together, danced in our living room, and had cozy movie nights filled with popcorn and laughter. I was on cloud 9, and it felt like nothing could pull me down. How naive I was to believe that the good times would last forever. But that's a story for the next chapter. For now, let's pause here and remember the garden as it was then, full of promise, reflecting the love we had and the life we thought we'd share. Little did I know, gardens are as susceptible to harsh winters as people are to life's cruel twists. And a cold season was coming, one that would change everything. You know how they say that love is like a rose? Beautiful to look at, but filled with thorns. Well, my life was about to get prickly. After our blissful beginning, I was elated when I found out I was pregnant. I remember buying one of those home pregnancy tests on a whim. When the 2 lines showed up, I sat there staring at it, a rush of emotions flooding over me, excitement, apprehension, joy, and a tiny bit of fear. I decided to surprise John with the news. I baked a cake and wrote, "We're going to be parents," in frosting. I couldn't keep the smile off my face as I set the table. John came home later than usual that evening, but it didn't dampen my spirits. When he walked through the door, he seemed tired, but the sight of the dinner's spread appeared to lift his mood. "What's all this?" he asked as he took off his coat and hung it by the door. "Just felt like celebrating," I replied coyly, leading him to the dining table. We sat down, and after a couple of bites, I could see his mood improving. Then it was time for dessert. "Close your eyes. I have a surprise for you," I said, filled with anticipation. All right, you've got my attention, John chuckled, closing his eyes obediently. I placed the cake in front of him and then told him to open his eyes. The look on his face as he read the message was a blend of disbelief and delight. "We're going to be parents," he said, his eyes meeting mine, a tear forming in the corner of his eye. "Yes, we are," I confirmed, my own eyes welling up. John got up and hugged me, lifting me off my feet in the process. "This is incredible, Karen. Absolutely incredible." I nestled into his arms, feeling content and optimistic. I know, right? I can't wait to start this new chapter of our life. That night, we lay in bed talking late into the night about baby names, what kind of parents we'd be, and all the little dreams we had for our future family. "Imagine teaching our kid to plant their first rose in the garden," John mused, "or watching them take their first steps in the living room," I added. We were lost in our dreams, weaving them into the night air like fragile webs of hope and love. But then, something changed. In the days that followed, the warmth that had defined our relationship began to wane. It was as if a switch had been flipped inside John. He started coming home late from work more frequently, offering terse explanations that lacked detail. "Tough day at the office," he'd say, or simply "work, you know how it is." It felt like a chilly draft had entered our home, leaving me confused and worried. Hadn't he been ecstatic about the baby? What had changed? "Is everything okay, John?" "You seem distant lately." I finally gathered the courage to ask one evening. "I'm just stressed, Karen. Work is insane right now," he replied, avoiding eye contact. "But we're about to become parents. I thought you were happy about that." "I am, but being a parent means more responsibilities. Financial ones that I can't ignore," he said, his tone tinged with irritation. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. His words were a veneer, covering something deeper, something he wasn't saying. I tried to tell myself that it was just a phase, that it would pass. After all, we had a lifetime of plans, dreams, delicately stitched into the fabric of our shared life. But sometimes a single loose thread can unravel an entire tapestry. Little did I know that our lives were about to take a turn that neither of us had anticipated. The fabric of our relationship was not just fraying, it was about to be torn apart. And it would start with a simple doctor's visit, one that would confirm the presence of not just one life growing inside me, but two. Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs at you when you least expect them. Just as I was coming to terms with John's unexplained aloofness, another revelation hit us like a bolt from the blue. I went in for my routine pregnancy checkup, and the ultrasound technician wore an intrigued look as she examined the screen. "Would you look at that?" she finally said, breaking the silence that had filled the room. "What is it?" I asked nervously, my eyes darting between the screen and her face. "You're having twins," she announced with a beaming smile. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Twins. The news was both exhilarating and petrifying. I walked out of the clinic clutching the ultrasound pictures, contemplating how to share this unexpected news with John. Given his recent behavior, I was unsure how he'd react, but the optimistic part of me hoped this would be the nudge we needed to get back on track. That evening, I decided to make John's favorite dinner, thinking a familiar comfort might soften the blow. When he arrived home, yet again, later than usual, I had everything set up. "Wow, what's the special occasion?" he asked, his eyes narrowing suspiciously as he scanned the dinner table. "We need to talk," I replied softly, and I thought a good meal might help the conversation flow more easily. After dinner, I took a deep breath. "John, I went for my checkup today." I began cautiously, and it turns out we're expecting twins. The color drained from his face, and for a moment, I thought he would collapse. He sat down heavily in his chair, his eyes avoiding mine. "Twins? Are you sure?" He finally said, his voice tinged with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "Yes, John, twins. 2 little lives growing inside me. We're going to have 2 babies," I reiterated, my voice tinged with a mix of excitement and concern. For a long moment, he said nothing. Finally, he looked up, his eyes cold. "Well, this certainly complicates things, doesn't it?" complicates things? John, we're talking about our children here. I'm well aware, Karen. But you have to understand, this adds a new level of stress and responsibility. Financially, emotionally, everything's going to be harder now. His tone was so detached it stung. Where was the man who dreamt with me about our kids playing in the garden? Replaced, it seemed, by a hollow replica. From that point on, the chill between us turned into a full-blown ice age. John withdrew further into his shell, hiding behind work commitments, while I was left to navigate the rocky terrain of our faltering marriage and an increasingly complicated pregnancy. John also started piling more responsibilities on me, saying it would help prepare me for the challenging times ahead. Tasks that we'd always shared, or ones that he had always shared, or ones that he had always taken up, were suddenly dumped on my plate. The house, the bills, and my disbelief, even the garden. John, can you please help me out in the garden this weekend? The doctor advised against heavy lifting. I pleaded one morning, my hands caressing my growing belly. He looked at me as though I'd asked for the moon. I can't, Karen. If we're having twins, I need to work twice as hard to keep us afloat. So you're saying I should risk our baby's health? I'm saying you need to adapt. Life's not going to be a walk in the garden anymore. His words cut through me, deepening the ever-widening gulf between us. Gone were days of shared dreams. We were now two souls living parallel lives under the same roof, our paths never intersecting. What had gone so wrong that love had turned into apathy, concern into indifference? But the worst was yet to come, a bitter winter storm that would break me and make me question everything. Little did I know, I was standing on the precipice of a life-altering event, one that would bring everything crashing down, exposing the harsh reality of the frosty world I was now a part of. The garden was always my sanctuary, a space where I could let go, breathe, and just be. Every flower, every shrub had been lovingly planted by me, and they stood as silent witnesses to the ebbs and flows of my life. But now, walking into the garden felt like stepping into a battlefield. My sanctuary had been tainted, made inhospitable by the unspoken tension that filled our home. One particularly difficult afternoon, when my back was aching and my ankles were swollen, I decided to ask John for help again. John, I really can't tend to the garden myself anymore. My body's not up for it, I said, hoping for a sliver of compassion. He looked at me with what seemed like a mix of disdain and indifference. Well, if you can't manage now, how will you manage with twins? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you seriously suggesting that I risk my health and the baby's health, all because you can't be bothered to spend an hour in the garden? Look, Karen, he snapped, I'm working hard for the future of this family. Maybe it's time you started doing the same. That was the last straw. You think ignoring your pregnant wife is working for the future? You call this a family? He looked away, visibly irritated. Then, without another word, he got up and walked out, locking the garden door behind him. There I was, left alone in my now desolate sanctuary, a garden that had turned into a prison. I tried to hold back my tears as I looked at the flower beds that needed tending, the weeds that had started to take over. With a heavy heart and aching body, I tried to clean up the garden as best as I could. Bending down was painful, each movement a struggle. But I pushed myself thinking if I could just do this one thing, maybe things would get better. After what felt like an eternity, my vision began to blur. I felt dizzy and disoriented, and my body was giving out signals that something was terribly wrong. I fell to my knees, clutching my stomach, a sharp pain ripping through me. John, help! Something's wrong! I screamed as loudly as my weakening body would allow. There was no response, no sign that he had heard my desperate cries for help. The pain intensified, and I felt myself losing consciousness. My last thought before everything went black was of the twins. Would they survive this? Would we ever be a family? When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, hooked up to monitors and IVs. A doctor came in and confirmed my worst fears. I had suffered a nervous miscarriage. Both babies were gone. As the news sank in, My eyes wandered to the side of my bed where John sat, his face ashen and his eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Karen," he stammered. "I never thought." But I cut him off. "Save it, John. You've shown your true colors, and no amount of apologies can erase that." In that moment, as I lay in that hospital bed, mourning the loss of my children and the shattering of my dreams, I knew what I had to do. Our marriage, like the garden that had been my sanctuary, was beyond salvage. And while gardens can be replanted, some relationships are better left to wither away. It was time to pick up the remaining pieces of my life and start anew. No more illusions, no more illusions, no more false hopes. Just the hard, cold truth and the strength to move on. The sterile smell of the hospital couldn't wash away the bitterness that engulfed me. Losing my twins felt like losing parts of my soul, bits that I would never get back. The following days were a blur of condolences, medical checkups, and blank stares into the emptiness. John tried to be there, but his presence was a haunting reminder of the heartache he'd contributed to. His apologies and tear-filled eyes meant nothing anymore. He had lost the privilege of my emotional space, of my trust. As soon as I was physically able, I returned home from the hospital. But home felt like a foreign concept now. Could you call a place home when it became the setting of your deepest despair? John had cleaned the garden. Perhaps he thought it would be a peace offering, an olive branch. But I knew it was too little, too late. "What are you going to do?" he asked me one evening, the weight of the situation hanging heavily between us. "I'm filing for divorce," I responded, my voice steady, not betraying the cyclone of emotions inside me. "You can't be serious, Karen. Look, I know I messed up, but we can work through this, for better or worse, right? For better or worse doesn't mean enduring abuse and negligence. John, you locked your pregnant wife in a garden to labor alone. You ignored my cries for help, and you ignored my cries for help, and you acted like you were the only one affected by the pregnancy. This isn't what marriage should be." But I said, "I'm sorry. What more do you want? I want a life where I'm respected, cherished, and treated like an equal partner, not like a burden. And clearly, you're not the person who can give me that." His eyes widened at the finality of my words. "So that's it then? You're willing to throw everything away?" "I'm willing to throw this away to find something better, for me and any future children I might have." A dense silence filled the room. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to salvage. The next few weeks were spent dividing assets, meeting lawyers, and signing papers. I opted to keep the house. It was mine before the marriage, and I had put my soul into it. I also had every intention of keeping the garden, of restoring it into the sanctuary it once was, only this time as a tribute to my lost children and my newfound independence. The final court session was a quiet affair, devoid of the theatrics one might see on TV. When the judge proclaimed us legally separated and mentioned the 2-year prison term for John due to proven emotional and physical abuse, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't happiness, far from it. It was the relief of ending a chapter that should have been closed long ago, of letting go of a weight that had been pulling me down. As I left the courtroom, my lawyer handed me the final divorce papers. "It's done," she said softly, her eyes meeting mine. "Yes, it's done," I echoed, feeling the enormity of the statement. It wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about reclaiming my life, my choices, and my future. The breaking point had come, shattering illusions, but also forging a stronger me. There was a long road ahead, one that involved healing and rediscovering the woman who got lost in a failing marriage. But it was a road I was now willing and eager to travel. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt like I could breathe again. I was free. And as I stood there, holding the papers that legally severed the ties with the man I once thought I'd spend my life with, I realized that sometimes the breaking point isn't the end. It's just a new beginning.